بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. A few common errors and common issues that people wonder about with respect to Ramadan. What are things that can go wrong? The first, and we're going to look about 10 or 11 things. The first of these is accidents, right? And we took that accidents break the fast. Okay? And an accident can be defined as anything that, any non-deliberate invalidation of the fast, right? Any non-deliberate invalidation of the fast. Something that was not deliberately done would be considered an accident. It breaks the fast. If it's excusable, then you may not be sinful for it, but it does break the fast, right? It's like a friend of mine once came to Jordan and he was trying out this Malaysian wraparound, right? It's like a lungi, but Malaysian style, right? And he was struggling because it kept falling, right? And he had a hard time having it wrapped around properly. And he got in serious trouble, right? About because it kept trying to fall down. So if you're praying, right, in that lungi, and your kid comes and tugs at it, it breaks your prayer, right? Was it your fault? No. But the fact that your aura, your nakedness became uncovered breaks your prayer, right? And the issue of it being deliberate or not doesn't enter into it. The same thing applies with the fast. You thought it was 4 a.m., but turns out it was actually 5 a.m. Fajr comes in at 4:30. If you ate after Fajr time has entered, invalidation took place. It was not deliberate, so you're not sinful for it, but the consequence still remains. Just like in the fast when your kid ran away with your clothes, right? Same thing. A sister is praying, kid tugged her at her hijab, ran away with it, breaks her prayer. She was not sinful for that, but so the same thing happens. So accidents break the fast. Forgetfulness does not. Forgetfulness does not. Forgetfulness is an exception. And what is forgetfulness? Forgetfulness is a state of non-consciousness. You engaged in that thing that invalidates the fast. You ate, you drank, even intercourse. If you are not conscious that you're fasting, it didn't occur to you that you're fasting, this and only this is excused. A second issue is, what about not feeling well? It's Ramadan, you're not feeling well. When are you allowed not to fast, and when are you expected to fast? Because we know sickness or being unwell is not all at the same level, right? You have a backache. Can you not fast? It's common sense, of course. What does your backache have to do with fasting, right? You fast, but you feel kind of tired. Do you have to fast or not? It returns to understanding the levels of hardship in Islam, right? Hardship, haraj, in the Sharia is considered to have two levels. There's slight hardship and there's undue hardship. Slight hardship is considered to be a natural consequence of being morally responsible. And it's not the basis of any dispensation, right? The word in the Arabic language for moral responsibility is taklif. The word in the Arabic language for moral responsibility is taklif, right? And what is taklif? Taklif is imposition of a burden. And if you know Urdu, taklif means difficulty or pain, right? It's an imposition of a burden. So the very act that the fact that you're morally responsible means that you have a burden that you bear. Getting up for Fajr is difficult, but it's considered slight difficulty, and that's just entailed by being morally responsible. So you get a little tired when you're fasting. It's not a basis of breaking the fast. You have an exam coming up, and you feel you might not quite be at the same mental level if you're fasting. That's just a slight hardship that you have to deal with, and there's ways to manage those things. The level of hardship that is the basis for dispensations when they're prescribed in the Sharia is undue hardship, right? Is undue hardship. Is hardship the like of which is not normally considered to be bearable, right? Or that would be considered to be an undue burden that's imposed on one. That there's some harm that's feared in it or through it, right? Or pain that is not considered in normal circumstances to be bearable. In that kind of case, so you have a slight cold, can you fast? No, it's not can you fast, you have to fast. But if you have some kind of flu and you're expected to take medication, if you can't take medication, you won't be able to go to work, or it will delay the healing, then that's a different case. So it's a case of undue hardship is when you're allowed not to fast because of sickness or the like. And that's that idea of understanding undue hardship. What is undue hardship? Undue hardship is hardship that is not normally considered bearable, or that it can only be borne with harm or undue pain or other difficulty. So this is the issue of not feeling well, right? So if you're really unwell, such that it would cause you to get worse or delay your healing, and in a way that people would consider consequential. One sign of it is that for example, you couldn't go to work, right? But if you can go to work and function completely at work, then a fortiori you should be able to fast, right? So this is the levels of hardship. Then there's a related issue that comes up. What if I fear falling ill, right? What if I fear falling ill? What if I fear that I won't be able to function at work? What if I fear that whatever? There's people who said, well, my husband expects that every iftar we have 7 dishes. I fear that I won't be able to cook them all if I'm fasting. So they don't fast. And there's Muslim lands where the women do qiyam al-layl in the kitchen, and during the day, instead of fasting, they're cooking, right? And they feel drained, and often they won't actually fast as a result. And this is considered to be, a bid'ah, right? A sinful innovation in habits, because the person's responsibility is to fast. Anything else is voluntary. Now, in terms of fear, right? Fear of harm, fear of hardship, fear of difficulty. Again, we have to understand what are the levels of fear. We have baseless fear and we have reasonable fear. Baseless fear is just a sort of what if, right? Just a thought comes, what if I get dizzy at work? Right? The question is, for it to be considered reasonable fear is there a basis for you to fear that you'll get dizzy at work? So we asked Brother Hamad, okay, Brother Hamad, you're worried that you'll get dizzy at work if you fast. How would we establish that's a reasonable fear? There's past experience. Last time he tried to fast, when he walked out of his house, he fell down the stairs. He tried again, and he fell in the bathtub, right? And he just can't function when he's fasting. He probably has to go see the doctor to figure out what's going on. But past experience establishes that when he's feeling in that way, he's not able to fast, right? He wakes up, he has a certain feeling, and he knows that he won't be able to fast that day because there's a basis in past experience. Or there's clear signs. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, the person's bent over their toilet vomiting, right? There's blood coming down, coming out of their mouth, and they're really emaciated. They're just feeling like they're about to faint. Okay. Now, if you ask that kind of person, can you fast the next day? Say, well, maybe I won't be able to function at work, whatever. No, there's clear signs, right? That is considered more than reasonable fear. So, fear that has a basis, right, that is reasonable, is either based on past experience, relevant past experience, or clear signs, right? Clear signs, any 2 people who looked at you say, of course you can't fast like that. Or expert opinion, okay, expert opinion. But what expert opinion do we rely on? For example, with fear of sickness, medical opinion. But we don't ask the doctor for a fatwa, right? We ask them for a medical opinion. If they're a Muslim doctor, the books of the fuqaha mention that you can rely on expert Muslim doctors' opinion if they're upright. But there's something that's implicit in what the fuqaha are saying there, which is you can rely on expert medical opinion if the doctor is Muslim, with the supposition that they know what is considered to be sufficient hardship for you not to fast, right? And that's generally not the case. The average Muslim doctor, even if they're religiously practicing, has no clue that, well, it's only when there's undue hardship that you can break the fast, right? Because a lot of doctors say, well, if you're taking any medication, don't fast. Why? Because something could happen, right? Something could happen. But if we ask them, is there basis for you saying that? They say, well, something might come up in scientific studies or whatever. Right? They're just worried about not getting sued, right? And if they're in the States, it's even more likely, right? So that's why you can't just rely on Muslim medical opinion, right? Because it's not the fact that they're Muslim that makes their opinion more important, right? It's the fact that it's expected that a Muslim doctor, like any other Muslim professional, should know the legal limits of the Sharia related to what they're doing. So they can say, well, this is your medical situation. This medical situation describes the state that the fuqaha deem to be undue hardship. But doctors who don't know that, and this is why we don't rely on non-Muslim medical opinion, because we don't expect them to know the limits of the Sharia. But similarly, Muslim doctors who are not aware of the limits of the Sharia, we don't rely on their opinion. Rather, we ask them questions about our physical state. We ask them, if I fast, what's likely to happen? Is there reasonable fear of delay of healing? Say, well, there could be a delay, but is there reasonable fear? Meaning, in similar situation, is there harm to be feared, etc. The doctor said, not really, but just err on the side of caution. No, you err on the side of fasting, right? Unless there's reasonable fear of harm, there's reasonable fear of hardship. If it's just an issue of hardship, you begin fasting, right? So Hamad is unsure. Is this the sort of state where I get dizzy and fall down the stairs? I'm not sure. So what does he do? He begins fasting. When he gets to the stairs, he pauses, says, am I feeling dizzy? If he is, let him break the fast before he tries walking down the stairs, right? But, similarly, in other cases, you fear that you might not be able to fast. You try, and when you feel weak, then you break the fast. So this is the idea of reasonable fear, right? So you can't just ask the doctor. A lot of people, and this relates to the next issue. What about sisters who are pregnant or nursing, Muslim women who are pregnant or nursing? They say, well, my doctor says I shouldn't fast when I'm pregnant. Why? Just in case. That's not sufficient. The basis is that pregnant and nursing women, the basis is that they're supposed to fast. Unless there's reasonable fear of harm for them or for the child. And from the reasonable fear of harm is, if the sister is nursing, that there's reasonable fear that this will affect the milk supply, right? If she's nursing, right? But she needs to take the means to be able to have the physical strength, not to be in that situation. But if she's not able to, then that is an excuse. The Prophet ﷺ gave a generally worded exception for pregnant and nursing women from fasting. But by general agreement of all four schools, this is conditioned based on other prophetic texts and from the understanding of the Sahaba, male and female. It is conditioned by fear of hardship or harm. Otherwise, the general practice of the female Sahabiyat and the early Muslims and Muslims of religious concern throughout the centuries has been that if someone was pregnant or nursing, that they would try to fast. If that fast then became unduly difficult, or there was some medical situation that would indicate fear of harm, right? It's a difficult pregnancy, there's fear of miscarriage or something like that, or some particular medical situation, then, okay, she would not fast, right? Some sisters just aren't physically able to fast when they're pregnant. But what do? They begin. They try to fast. When they start feeling that it's too difficult, then they break their fast. They try a few days. Maybe they try to eat extra, get some, advice on how they can be properly nourished. But if they can't, they can't. But they have to at least attempt to try. If there's the fear hardship, if there's fear of harm, right, then it has to be reasonable fear. They don't have to actually harm themselves and say, okay, next kid, I'm going to not fast. No, but rather, you ask medical opinion, but you have to see what the doctor is saying. Because you ask the average doctor, any kind of medical situation, you say, you have an ingrowing toenail, should I fast? Say, just in case, don't, right? Because who knows, because doctors are scared of medical liability and stuff. So that's about pregnant and nursing women. Another issue that people ask about is what about brushing teeth, right? Brushing teeth. Using the siwak, the miswak, the toothbrush, the wooden toothstick, that is permitted in Ramadan, permitted and praiseworthy in Ramadan, both early in the day and late in the day in the Hanafi school. In the Shafi'i school, after Dhuhr time, it becomes makruh to use it. But the Hanafis didn't buy that. They said, if you're trying to make your breath worse because of the hadith that the breath of the fasting person is more beloved to Allah than musk, then it would be recommended to eat garlic and ginger and other like other things, onions that are raw and other such things before Fajr time, so that you can really change your breath, right? And that's not the case, right? That's not the case. Rather, the hadith is that whatever your breath is pleasing to Allah. It's not about, there's no inverse relationship between bad breath and divine good pleasure, right? So, brushing the teeth is permitted. The issue arises with toothpaste. Toothpaste is a foreign substance, right? And it can really wreak havoc with your fast. In general, putting a foreign object into your mouth that you could potentially swallow is disliked, right? Is disliked. So using toothpaste in Ramadan is disliked in general. So it should be avoided. However, some situations arise. You've been out of a job for 3.5 years, and finally you get your first interview, right? And you get bad breath, and the job interview is at 2 p.m. Yeah, you couldn't get a morning interview. So what do? In situations where there's obvious need, you're in a sales position, right? And you're going to get fired, right? Because if your breath smells bad, right? Then in those situations, what do? You are allowed to use toothpaste. Using toothpaste doesn't invalidate the fast. Rather, swallowing toothpaste or swallowing saliva that has been affected by the toothpaste itself is what would invalidate the fast. So when there's need, right, one would use the toothpaste in a manner that would not endanger one's fast. Right? One would use one's toothpaste, the toothpaste, so you use only a little, right? And you brush in a way that after you brush, you rinse out. But if you do brush your teeth, if you rinse out the toothpaste once, right, and then you use water one more time, then after that, right, any sense of toothpaste being in your mouth is excused. Right? That's excused. Right? That is excused. The same thing applies. The fuqaha mentioned if you use the miswak, and some of them have very strong natural scent. What do? You rinse out once, right? And if just to be sure, a second time. After that, if you get a sense that your saliva is being affected or whatever, you ignore that, right? Because you've taken reasonable means. So that's brushing teeth. Medication. If the medication is ingested, right, it goes down your mouth or your nose, it breaks the fast. So if you have to take medication during the day, consult your doctor. Is there an alternative? Can you take it? And there's many times that the medicine, you can make adjustments so you can take it at night or before Fajr time, etc. And the person of religious concern would try to find this out in advance, because some things, you can only adjust it gradually. But the Ramadan begins and you say, oh, let me go to my doctor. Say, well, now it's too late. Right? If you have a medical need, then taking medication through mouth or nose would invalidate the fast. If it's out of medical need, then it's excused. However, taking injections does not break the fast. Taking injections does not break the fast. So that's one alternative for some cases. Taking an injection doesn't break the fast. Suppositories do break the fast. Suppositories do break the fast. And though most people don't use them for other than medical needs, but using suppositories for other than medical need is a major sin. What about children and fasting? Okay, what about children and fasting? In general, the sunnah with children and worship and is that as they're small, we make them familiar with the acts of worship and just let them passively, positively engage in them. Once they reach the age of 7, we encourage them specifically to perform these acts of worship, whether they be prayer or fasting and other acts, but without being particular about them doing them completely validly. So for example, a child 7, we specifically encourage them to pray. But one day they're sort of running around in the park, they don't have wudu. We have evidence that they don't have wudu. But, at that point, if you try to tell them, beta, go and make wudu and pray, they won't do it. So just say, okay, pray. But as they get older, you increasingly emphasize not only them acting, but them acting properly. Right? This relates to prayer, this relates to fasting and other matters. Initially, when they're 7, you tell them to fast, but you give them a snack mid-morning, mid-afternoon, or mid-morning, or midway between Asr and Maghrib, whenever. Right? Because you're getting them used to it. But by the time they reach 10, they're treated like an adult is treated with respect to their religious obligations. Even if they haven't hit adulthood yet. They haven't hit puberty yet, but they're still dealt with as an adult. Why? So that they're ready. So that they're ready to fulfill their responsibility. And this relates to all their religious duties. Covering up, issues of halal and haram, what they can wear, what they can't, etc. In general, from when they're small, we inculcate these values and make them inclined towards the good. But once they reach the age of 7, we specifically encourage them without undue emphasis on all the details, but increasingly we hold them to sound conduct as well. Once they're 10, we specifically discipline them for not doing it. But before they're 10, they're not disciplined. A 7-year-old kid, you tell them, beta, pray, you try to encourage them, whatever, they don't. They're not disciplined. You don't give them a timeout or whatever for not praying when they're 7. Right? You may frown at them, but right? This is about children and fasting. Some key sunnahs of fasting, we mentioned some of them, but just to quickly review, we mentioned about hastening the iftar after making sure that the time is in. Delaying the suhoor, but delaying the pre-dawn meal, but making sure that one stops 10 minutes or so before, out of recommendation, and making sure 100% that one does stop eating and drinking before Fajr time enters. The i'tikaf is one of those underemphasized sunnahs. The Prophet ﷺ would almost invariably go into i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan. This is considered to be a communal emphasized sunnah. It was a sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ emphasized, but he did not specifically hold people to it. So most of the Sahaba did not perform it regularly, but nearly all of them performed it at some point in their lives. Right? So the i'tikaf of i.e. going into retreat in the case of men, specifically in the mosque, with women, it can be performed in their place of prayer at home, and that's best, or at the mosque if proper adab are taken into account. This is an emphasized sunnah. One should try to do it at least once in one's life. And like other matters, if you have a job, etc., you have to make those adjustments. But this is one of those things one should strive to do. If one can't make the complete i'tikaf, at least to spend some of the time in i'tikaf, even it doesn't have to be the whole night. Any time you spend in the masjid is considered i'tikaf. Any time a woman spends in her musalla, in her place of prayer at home, can be considered i'tikaf, in Ramadan or outside Ramadan. So that's a great opportunity. And a sister can perform i'tikaf even when she's in her period. right? At home, in her place of prayer. So that's an opportunity. This is the month of the Quran. You want to do something meaningful? Develop your relationship with the Quran, right? The Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of people, and he was most generous in the month of Ramadan. And charity in Ramadan is multiplied 70-fold or 80-fold. And this is a tremendous month for charity. The best charity you can give is the charity that is of greatest benefit, okay, and the most lasting benefit. So that's one of the things that this month is good for. But at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ told us that begin with yourself and then those whom you are responsible for. And spending on yourself doesn't mean that, oh cool, I'm going to go buy the latest Bluetooth headset because I saw someone has the latest Bluetooth headset, so I got to buy it. I'm beginning with myself. No. Beginning with oneself means that begin by, because you give in charity, why? Seeking the good, right? A lot of people, they're very economical when it comes to their religious benefit, right? They will buy the latest shoes and this and that, but spending in terms of getting beneficial religious materials or getting beneficial religious things for their children, or but starting with oneself, right? Very often we keep ourselves from the good out of this false sense of economy, and that is an error. And spending on oneself in ways of benefit is considered charity, right? And the Prophet ﷺ promised that no wealth is diminished by charity. And then we looked at the limits to brushing teeth, right? That's one of the sunnahs. But one can brush one's teeth, just one does not use toothpaste. The ninth thing is Taraweeh. Right? This is one of the sunnahs that one should strive to perform properly. Taraweeh is 20 rak'ahs for both men and for women, according to all four schools. Right? According to all four schools of Sunni Islam, Taraweeh is 20 rak'ahs. It being 8 rak'ahs is a misunderstanding of the sunnah. Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said that the Prophet ﷺ did not pray more than 8 rak'ahs in Ramadan or outside Ramadan. What she's referring to in the hadiths about Taraweeh being 8 rak'ahs or 11 rak'ahs, about praying in Ramadan as 8 rak'ahs, nearly all the major hadith compilations have this hadith under the chapter of tahajjud. That the tahajjud, the night vigil prayer, the Prophet ﷺ's general habit was to pray 8 rak'ahs in Ramadan and outside Ramadan. Taraweeh is not tahajjud, is not the night vigil prayer, it's a specific sunnah. So those hadith, and that's a misinterpretation. The practice of the position of all four schools is that the emphasized or recommended sunnah, they differ on its degree of emphasis, is 20 rak'ahs. And this for both men and women. The sunnah is fulfilled by its performance. It is specifically recommended, on top of performing it, for men to perform it in congregation, ideally at the mosque. But if someone, for example, they have work circumstances or whatever, they're taking care of their parents, whatever the case may be, they should still perform the 20 rak'ahs. And there's also says, if you can't do something completely, a lot of people say, it's a devilish argument, can't do it completely, don't do it. No, the sunnah is that فَسَدِّدُوا وَقَارِبُوا, right? That be steadfastly committed on doing the right thing and do your best. So if you can't do it completely, you can't do 20 rak'ahs in the masjid with khatam of Quran and this and that, then do what you can. Just perform the 20 rak'ahs, even if you read Qul Huwallahu Ahad in every rak'ah. And one of the beautiful things in the Muslim world is in the large cities, you find taraweehs of every type, right? Some mosques, they pray really slowly, like 3.5 hour taraweehs you'll find in Damascus and elsewhere. And there's other places, like in the marketplace, they have taraweeh, but I mean, one person told, I didn't believe it. There's one masjid, it's one of the big mosques in Damascus, Jami' al-Hanabila. Right? The Hanbalis used to hang out there 1,000 years ago, or 900 years ago. And they said, they only read about 20 rak'ahs of Surah Al-Rahman in Taraweeh. I said, how can you read 20 rak'ahs? Literally, like, they'll read Ar-Rahman, Allahu Akbar. Right? One word. Right? Which is actually problematic in the Hanafi school, but there's difference of opinion. But why? So that those who could do the khatam, they go for that. Those who can do the short version, they'll go for that. Right? And this is from the beauty of our deen. There's also social dimensions in the month of Ramadan. Right? Ramadan, one of the great things one can do is to feed others in this month. And feeding a person who's fasting, you get the reward of someone fasting. But there also has to be a sense of balance, right? That it shouldn't just become a social event. That social dimension should be a means for you to express your faith and to seek your Lord, right? So don't just invite the same circle of friends that you hang out with, right? Use the month of Ramadan at the social level to mend family ties, right? To repair family ties. And that's one of the greatest of acts in worship. In Islam, the Prophet ﷺ said that أفضل الإيمان إصلاح ذات البين, or أفضل الإسلام إصلاح ذات البين. Of the best of Islam is mending family ties. وإفسادها هي الحالقة. And cutting family ties is the shaver, right? It destroys. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I do not say it shaves off hair, rather it shaves off your religion. Rather it destroys your deen, right? So mending family ties, if you have estranged cousins or relatives, or uncles, aunts, whatever, even worse, parents or siblings or children, mend those relationships. And the Prophet ﷺ said that silatul rahim, maintaining family ties, is not to be good to your family members when they're good to you. But rather, maintaining family ties is for you to maintain ties when others are cutting them off. So your uncle is being completely unreasonable with you. Maintaining family ties, now, well, he's being unreasonable to me, I'll be unreasonable to him, right? No, it's to mend relations anyways. Similarly, with old friends, with people who are on the edge of the community, the poor, the needy, people who've just entered Islam, they maybe don't have a community of friends and family to spend this month with, right? So this is part of making Ramadan a spiritual experience. So one's socializing as well is out of faith and sincere seeking. So those are some of the points to remember regarding the month. And then we have some time now for questions, inshallah ta'ala.